Okay, so Via is thought to be a stereotypical Irasti woman, kind of submissive, below everyone else. The truth is that her ideology provides like a really big contrast to this. She is actually pretty interesting when you dive deeper into what she believes. So her ideology provides answers to the questions in Tinder's third chapter on equality and inequality that shed quite a lot of light on what Via actually thinks, contrary to how it seems in The Dispossessed. So Via believes that women are superior to men, that superior humans are identified as women who are also wealthy, and if inequality was abolished, estrangement would not disappear. Men and women shouldn't always be treated equally, and if all inequalities were abolished, liberty would not survive. The parallel thinker that Via most closely resembles are feminist separatists, and Glenn Tinder in his book Political Thinking on page 94 says, "For people who hold this position, the aim is not equality for women, but rather a separate or even superior place for women." And I'm guessing that when you guys read The Dispossessed, you did not think that Via would fall into this category. So let's get into it. The first question, are humans unequal in essence? Via would answer yes, and that women are greater than men. We see examples for this all around the chapter in The Dispossessed when Shevek is over at Via's party, when he takes her out in the town. It's kind of weird because she's married, he's going out on dates with her, and it's just one of those things. So on page 215, when Shevek asks her what exactly women do on Urus, she says, "Why, run the men, of course." And it's perfectly safe to tell them that because they never believe it. They say, "Ha ha, funny little woman," and pat your head and sulk off with their medals jangling, perfectly self-content. So what that means is that it kind of seems like a joke because she says it in kind of a sarcastic tone, but she actually means it. And we see this when she's taking Shevek around. Via's pretty wealthy. She's all dolled up and showing off her drip swag, all that good stuff. And she makes Shevek pay for everything. She makes him pay for supper. She makes him pay for a taxi. All this stuff. Never offers once "Hey, I'll pay." She manipulates. Shevek also describes her as, and I quote, actress-like. So when you're hanging out with someone and they're putting on a face like an actor, that should be a little off-putting just because if you're actress-like, you don't know what someone really thinks. And then so the feminist separatists would also agree that humans are unequal in essence, and they put forth two solutions. One, that females get their own separate society, no males at all, and babies are conceived without males, so in vitro, I believe. And on page 96, Tinder writes that on the views of feminist separatists that women are better than men, he writes, "But of course they are no more extreme nor more manifestly unreasonable than the assumptions of male superiority that have been commonplace for centuries." So when people think about feminist separatism and feminist separatists believing that women are way better than men, they often think, well, wow, they're kind of radical. Well, isn't it also radical that men were thought to be superior for pretty much the entirety of history? So the second question in Tinder's chapter is, how can these superior humans be identified? Via would say two things. Women and economic status. So since Via kind of aligns herself with feminist separatists, she thinks that women are better. And the evidence for that is from the quote that I told you on the last slide, that women run the men. So why wouldn't women be superior? And also economic status. And one can kind of draw this conclusion without textual references just because of Via's background growing up on Urus. The wealthy run the country, they have no contact with poor people, so it's only fitting that this lady right here, a woman holding up a bunch of cash, would be the most superior human. The third question that Tinder poses is, if inequality was abolished, would estrangement disappear? And Via would say no. So to get this answer, we have to look at why there's inequality in the first place, and it's due to genders. So if conventional inequalities are abolished, so the glass ceiling is shattered, wages are paid similarly, you still have the glaring issue of pregnancy and unfair burdens placed on females that they do not ask for. Because females did not ask to be the ones who had to carry human babies. So, if inequality was abolished, there would still be deception and a power struggle between men and women just because of their genders. And the only way to create a truly equal society is if gender itself does not exist. So, feminist separatists also talk about the burden of pregnancies. And in a novel that kind of exemplifies their beliefs, written by Charlotte Gilman, who is a feminist, entitled Her Land, depicts a society made up entirely of women. The inhabitants have developed a capacity for self-initiated pregnancies, always producing female infants, thus maintaining the population. The society is a female utopia. So that's kind of going along with how pregnancy is what truly makes men and women unequal, and is the only way that they could be equal, is if there was no gender. So the fourth question in the chapter is, should men and women always be treated equally? And Via would say absolutely not. Throughout the chapter, Via takes advantage of chivalry and some of those cultural norms in order to kind of further her own standing. So at the party, the dinner party, when Shevek tries to rape her unsuccessfully, she does not contest to having sex with Shevek. She contests that she has not taken her birth control, which is kind of weird for a married woman to say that because she is married. So she uses sex to manipulate, due to, if men and women are always treated equally, she has no way to use her body as her manipulation. So that's one of the big things that she does. She uses her acting to control, so I put that nice PNG of Marilyn Monroe up there, because when I was reading this, that's who I thought of, kind of superficial, maybe a little fake looking. And then there's the free rider thing that Via was kind of rolling with. There's a bill right there, there's two people dining, and she was sticking Shevek with the bill every time. Which is why she would argue that men and women shouldn't be treated equally, because if they're treated equally, she can no longer use norms to further her own interests. So the fifth question that Tinder asks is, if all inequalities were abolished, could liberty survive? So the best example that portrays Via's views being no is Inaris. When Shevek describes Inaris to Via, she's shocked, because all she's ever known is women being judged by their bodies, their income, and all that superficial stuff. She can't even begin to conceive a planet where everyone is equal. So she believes that if she's forced to integrate with the poor on Urus, that all the liberties will die because she'll no longer be better. And you can't blame her for thinking that, because she's grown up in a society that's only practiced that. So on page 219 of The Dispossessed, when they're discussing Inaris, Via says that she talks about an article that she read in a magazine about Odonianism, and she says, "I know that you've got a queen Tiea inside you, right inside that hairy head of yours, and she orders you around just like the old tyrant did her serfs." So she believes that even though they moved off the planet, that all the people on Inaris are still controlled by the same primitive kind of bad stuff clouding their minds. And so how does this tie in with Le Guin's intentions as she wrote the book? Well, she wanted to kind of put out there the objectification of women. And so she did that by creating Via, who is objectified throughout the entire chapter, who has all these superficial views. She also wanted to point out gender roles such as pregnancy, which is why she put the birth control part in there. And that spoke volumes towards how women are held down by specific gender roles. Critics actually blasted Le Guin feminist critics blasted Le Guin for not being feminist enough, because Shevek is the main character, and it seems like a lot of the characters in The Dispossessed are male. So in conclusion, we can learn a lot from the way that Via would answer the questions of Glenn Tinder in her and how that ties into her values and what she actually believes. Via is not as shallow as she may seem, and raises a lot of important questions about gender norms, stereotypes, and other things that hold women back in both their society and ours. Thank you. Anyone have any questions?
There will be questions.
Okay, who has questions? Who wants to ask
Questions.
stuff? Please ask stuff.
Please ask him.
Captain.
Do you think that Via's opinions are widely held on Earth? Or do you think that she's more of an outlier?
Given the information that Le Guin gives us in the book, I think it's hard to say. I would assume that somewhere on that planet there's got to be more people who think like she does. And one of the things that was interesting as I kind of researched all of this is, so Dr. Bass told me to look into the cult of domesticity, which I forgot to bring up. And so I'll give you guys the kind of the overview of that. The cult of domesticity is like the idea that it was kind of like brought into place by like Christianity, and like it was kind of like an ethical code almost. It claimed that if you did not have like this like family kind of with the man in charge and the woman taking care of the children, that you were immoral. So you had this like rise in like the nuclear family, and like that kind of forced women into becoming just mothers and not like workers in the society. So Via is pretty against the cult of domesticity. That's pretty clear. And where was I going with that? I was going somewhere good. So
Would it be, because this is a point that I'd like to bring up about the cult of domesticity, that basically with that, if you don't have children, then you're not seen as a full woman?
and it's like part of that, like if you don't have a family, you're immoral, you're bad. Like that's not good. And so I would assume that since like the cult of domesticity seems to be like kind of a big thing on Urus, that there's got to be more women who share the idea. But maybe are like, I'm sure there's even like women in the slums of Urus who share the idea. And I would assume that it might be even more prevalent in the slums, being that they do not have the advantages that Via has. To answer that question.
Yes, you did.
Other questions, please.
If you guys ask me questions, I'll ask you questions. If you don't ask me questions, I'm not going to ask you guys questions.
All right, is this leading me to ask questions
No.
of all of you?
No,
Okay, we can go there.
no,
I just feel like you covered it really well.
he did. He was very,
Well, that's-
he's very informative.
So the bottom line is, this is like excellent?
Ooh.
This is
It's,
excellent.
it's proficient.
I actually do have
This-
one.
this-
Okay, we have two coming.
I've got a what if. Okay. Do you think that if Via met Tokver, do you think they would get along?
Thanks.
Sorry.
Oh, that's a good question. I could see them getting along, but I could also see them like clashing quite a bit.
Nice nailing your flag to the fence there, Clayton.
Okay, fine. I can see them getting along. There's a part. Okay, so there's a part in Dispossessed when Tokver says that she wishes that she was like a fish and could lay the eggs, swim away, and then come back and eat them if she wanted to. And I feel like Via also believes that pregnancy is really unfair to women. So I think that they would find common ground there and like maybe build past some of their differences. I think they both believe that pregnancy holds women back.
Okay, that's all the time we have for this one. Thank you very much. Very good. Okay,